Hello everyone, welcome back to A Wild Approach. In this video I want to discuss native garden tips or wildlife garden tips. There's a lot of overlap with these two gardening methods, and I kind of feel like wildlife gardening or wild gardening is sort of an umbrella that includes native plant gardening. That's how I view it. And so I want us to discuss different ideas and tips for this type of gardening, because I think that a lot of people want to better their environment, better their ecosystem around them, and also get a front row seat to beautiful butterflies, bees, and birds. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to have a water source for your wildlife. And yeah, this water source looks a little dirty right now. When you unhook your hoses for winter, it can be a little trickier to keep them clean. So maybe sometimes bring out a water can out there and just kind of clean it as best you can and dump out the old water every now and then. I also highly recommend that you use either mosquito bits or mosquito dunks in your water sources. I don't know if you could see in that footage, but I do have like these little mosquito dunks that I basically just kind of break into pieces. For these small little puddles, you don't need like a huge donut. You can just break it in pieces and you can just divide it up that way. Next, I want to talk about garden design. Garden design should be fun, but also practical. Keep yourself flexible about your garden design. Not everything goes the way that you expect. Save each sketch and garden design idea you make throughout the years. This is so important because you can see how your idea develops. You can see how the practicality of things can kind of take over and replace the vision or the imagination of things. And as you can see in this image right here, this garden design was one I did many years ago. And my current garden has some similarities, but it's mostly very different from this original idea. So if you look, you'll see that there's an area for a gate in the top left corner, and there's an area for a gate in the top middle, and then there's this kind of circular area in the very middle of the garden, and there's this big thick path toward that bigger gate in the middle, right? This is similar to what I have now, but it's not exactly the same. It's not even close to the same. My original garden design involved two specific kinds of crepe myrtles, I think. And those trees were supposed to be flanked or planted up around them with Joe Pye weed. That is not at all what I have now. Totally different than that now, but the basic shapes of the beds and the basic paths are very similar actually right now. Like there's a path from the archway, there's a path from that big gate, which that big gate is technically just a fence that I can open and shut. And the smaller gate is actually a gate. So you can see that this is the original old design. I think this is the first, no, this might be the second garden design I ever did. I don't think I actually have a photo of the first one on here. But you can see that it is a lot different than the images that you're going to see in this video, but yet there's so many similarities as well. So be flexible, because you have to kind of go off of, well, you definitely have to go off of right plant, right place. I mean, you're going to lose plants that aren't happy in the spot that they're in. So that's just a fact of life. And here is a design that I am not really done with. It's pretty much just me wanting to meticulously draw what I actually have, but also maybe kind of plan out what I want to have. It's mostly what I already have or what I already had at the time, and I never really finished it. It felt too rigid. It felt too almost, I don't know how to explain it, like too clinical. That sounds like a weird way to word something for a garden design, but I don't know how else to describe it. It was just too meticulous, I guess, too rigid. So I kind of abandoned this one, but you can get the gist. It's just from a different angle. So this is a view from the house toward the front garden, and you can clearly see where the archway is on the right, and you can see where the fence can open on the left there, the big area, and then the little gate, which is not really little. In real life, that gate's big, but the other one's bigger because the other one you can fit a car in there. And that's a really big thing that we wanted when we fenced our front yard in, is we wanted to be able to bring a vehicle into the garden for this early stage of the garden, for early maintenance. Maybe we needed to haul compost. In fact, when we did haul compost, we didn't pull the car in for the compost right there, but we did wheelbarrow it into the big gate instead of the little one, because it was just easier, more convenient, going right to the area of the garden we need to go and not having to loop around or use the sidewalk that's in front of the house. So basically, if you have maintenance needs, if you know that you're going to be doing a lot of mulching in the first couple years because you're waiting for things to grow in, maybe make it as accessible as possible, and maybe even make an area where your car can get in there for the early stages, because you may have things that you aren't foreseeing right now. And in fact, we still have that area of the fence is still openable. We have to use power tools to open it. It's not just like a gate where you just open it and shut it really easily. We have to actually use power tools to open it and shut it back. So if we open it, we're going to probably have it open for a few days and use it, and then when we're done, we're going to close it back, and it's going to be closed for months at a time. So it's more of a utility situation, and it's, in our opinion, temporary, because when we are done with the main structure inside the garden, we shouldn't, in theory, need to bring the car in there anymore, because we shouldn't really need heavy equipment or lots and lots of mulch in the future, because our goal is a green mulch. In this sketch, I was recording new plantings I added and also trying to plan for bed expansions. I wanted to record just the basic shapes and the new plants. The pin, which is in purple, is before the pencil expansions. Don't be afraid to do quick doodles like this. So the idea behind this is you're in your garden journal and you're recording maybe some plants you just bought at the nursery, and you've already planted them, or you plan to plant them, and this is where you want to plant them. I think in my case, I already planted them and then recorded where I put them in here so that I could remember, number one, and number two, so I can keep track of the basic layout of the garden in conjunction with those new plantings. But I also wanted to use pencil to create this new area in the middle. I had an idea for a seating area that's kind of enclosed in the middle of the garden, and connecting the archway bed to the island bed in the middle there. And you can see like a little chair and a table, and you can also see a little circle where I circled the redbud tree. I think that was just because I forgot to draw it in pen, because the redbud tree was actually already there. But this is a great way to take what you already have that be in pen, and then use pencil to create new areas or ideas of connecting beds. This way you can erase it, you can play around with it, and you don't have to feel like you're going to ruin your original design or your original garden sketch, because you have a whole new sketch here. It's just more basic shapes and it's not super detailed. In other words, draw your garden multiple times. Draw your future garden multiple times, and draw your current garden multiple times. Make a point of just practicing sketching this garden layout and figuring out what you like and maybe what you want to change in the future, because the garden is not static. Here's a more illustrative sketch showing a very rough look at what the grown or mature plants could look like in the future. Scale of spacing is off, but the idea is still there. This was a way for me to get some idea what it could look like as the trees grow in. But below it, not shown in this image, is the list of plants below the sketch. So I have a list of plants below this sketch that tell just the basic trees and shrubs in this scene. scale is off because, as you can see, the garden feels a lot smaller and more closed in than it is in reality. The big gate that a car fits inside of looks a lot smaller in this image and looks barely bigger than the person gate. Or walking gate? I don't know what else to call the gate where a person can walk through it. But anyway, as you can see, everything's more closed in and more close together in this sketch. So it's not realistic based on that, but it gives a basic idea on how the trees kind of look when they grow taller, or how the vines kind of look on the archway, and how tall it might look when the frostweed grows, things like that. So this is a great way to just use your imagination and try to envision what the garden will look like as it grows and as it matures, because it can be kind of tricky and difficult to imagine that, at least for me. And it's like I can imagine it vaguely, but getting it down on paper helps me imagine it just a little bit better. And here is a very messy little sketch of the dry creek. So I designed the dry creek to basically accommodate water that would come off of the back hill behind my house and the roof. And the reason I did this is I noticed it was getting very wet inside of one of our basement rooms. Now, this basement room was technically not an interior room. There was no door from this room to the basement. It was kind of its own little isolated room. It was just storage that was kind of chilly in there, but it does have a heat duct that runs to it. It's just not super insulated, so it gets pretty chilly. Well, this room would get moist because water would somehow seep in down at the foundation level of the room. I needed a way to keep that from happening, or at least prevent it from being as bad as it was, because there would be a very tiny puddle and it wasn't great. It would stain the walls and the floors, and it just wasn't pleasant to have a wet, damp room that we needed to store stuff in. So I also worried about the integrity of the concrete, this water coming in and out of this concrete. How is that okay? So I didn't like that, and I actually got quotes from companies on them helping us to install a system that would pump the water out, but that didn't really make sense to me because I wanted to prevent the water from coming in the first place. That was the whole point. And why would I want to pump the water out when it is a tiny little puddle? It's a tiny puddle, but I just don't want that water to come in at all, right? So I did a little bit of research, and I looked around the grade of the house and realized that the land was sloped toward the house on that side. And the reason for that was partially due to a gutter that was installed down at that hill, kind of touching it and pressing on it, which created a dip right up against the foundation, which means that any water that did come down from the sky at a slant would land in that little dip, and it would just go straight to the concrete foundation and leach through the wall at the base. Not great, right? This is probably how it was happening. Another way it could be happening is there could be, a leak in that gutter, and then it's just straight above that dip, and so it has nowhere to go but in the dip, and again, straight down to that foundation. So there were multiple things that could have been happening with that. And so I changed the grade. I moved that gutter. I changed how the gutter ran. I actually removed the big section of gutter and put a different kind of gutter there. And I connected it to a rock path. And so I had like a rock path and I had a rock ditch next to it. And I ran that down the hill. And as you can see, that's the right side of the graphic at the bottom. That's the side of the house, and you can see the path, you can see the rocks, and I made it all connect to this dry creek, and then the dry creek goes down the hill next to the house into a rain garden. The rain garden's blurry in this graphic, but you can see that it's there. And so far, this has worked. Now, we've been getting more rain the past few days, and definitely it's a great time to go check on it. But so far, when we check on it, it's great. It's been working just fine. So that's awesome. Here you can see I decided to name each section of the garden, which I highly recommend unless your garden is extremely tiny or is just made up of containers. If it's just made up of containers, you could easily put little plant name tags in each pot, and then you don't really need to know the garden section. You just really need to know what plant is in what pot, right? But if you are like me and you have a 1/4 acre, which is roughly what we have, might be a little bit less, might be a little bit more, but it's somewhere around there. If you have multiple sections of garden, if you have a front yard and you have a backyard, and then each of these sections also has their own divisions within them, then I highly recommend naming them. Because if you have anyone helping you with your garden, such as a partner, a spouse, or even like someone that you hire to come help you, this is a great way to communicate what part of the garden we're about to work on, or what part of the garden you want to work on soon, or what part of the garden you've already watered for the day. So many reasons to name the sections of your garden. I highly, highly recommend it. So in this graphic, you see that the driveway is on the left, the garage is at the very back of the house at the bottom of the graphic. And between the garage and the house, I call that the courtyard. And there's a path, and I call that private path. And it leads you to Fern Gully, which is the side garden. Fern Gully was a movie I loved as a kid, and so I thought it would be a cute little area. Plus, I wanted to grow ferns there, but I don't think ferns are going to grow there. But I'm still going to call it Fern Gully because I just love the name. And if you go down to the bottom of the graphic, you'll see that is actually up a hill, by the way, and so I call it Mossy Hill because it's full of moss that's just naturally there. Behind the garage, I call it Hidden Alley. It's kind of a play on Hidden Valley. I thought it'd be funny. Plus, it feels like a little alleyway. It's kind of tucked away, kind of hidden, a little bit more private than the rest of the garden, and that's actually where I put my compost bins and my brush pile. And then if you go to the left of that, you'll see I call that wall garden. It's a retaining wall that holds up the soil behind our driveway. And then if you go all the way through Fern Gully, you'll make it to the front yard at the top of the graphic. And you'll see there's road hedge, habitat hedge, gate garden. You'll see archway bed east and west, and rain garden and island bed. Okay, so this is so helpful to help you organize your garden, and it helps you decide where should you put new beds. You know, you've got island bed here. What if we connect island bed with archway bed, or island bed? What if we connect that to habitat hedge? You know, this gives you a way of language and communication to whoever's helping you garden, or even to yourself, help you document it in your garden journal. Because even if it's just you gardening, you still want to record this in a garden journal. And that's the next thing I want to discuss is please, please, please keep a garden journal, because it will help you plan for future garden beds. It will help you look back at the past and see what were the positives and negatives in your garden. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? What would you do differently next time? And it just really helps you stay organized and learn new things about the garden. In fact, I noticed that I write little notes throughout my garden journal throughout the year of plants that I want to buy next time I go to the nursery, or plants that I think would serve a specific function in the garden, like a living mulch, or maybe habitat for certain species of wildlife. These notes are easily forgotten, and so it's great to have them written down so you can go back and review it later. By the way, wintertime is a great time to go back to your garden journal and review things you wrote in it. I plan to do this winter. It gives you something to do in the winter when you don't have as much to do in the garden. Does that mean there's nothing to do in the garden? No, there's still stuff to do in the garden in winter, and I actually plan to have a whole video on that soon. But one of them is actually not in the garden, and it's in your house, and it's you cozying up on the couch and reading your garden journal. That way you can review what plants you want to get next time you go to the nursery, what seeds you want to buy, and maybe you already have seeds and you just need to plan when to plant them, where to plant them, and what kind of stratification they need. So this is a much more intense and detailed garden design, and this is a more long-term vision that I have for my garden, and it's very messy. So I totally understand if you need to pause the video and you need to look at this. This is the same graphic doubled on the footage right now and flipped, because this kind of garden design is tricky for me. I needed to be able to read it both ways because I have the front garden and the back garden, and I tend to kind of draw and write things one way, and then when I flip it to work on the other side, I draw and write that way. So in other words, it needs to be turned upside down to read part of it. And this is already changed in real life. This garden design is just what my idea was at the time of what I wanted to do with the entire property, from the very back alley all the way to the front road hedge. And actually, I don't know if it goes all the way to the front row hedge. I think it actually cuts off somewhere in the front garden. But if I had the room, it would have gone all the way to the front road hedge as well. And the reason for this is I think it's great to not only do these more simple bubble drawings of your garden to get a basic idea of where things are, but I think it's also great to, when you have the time, to sit down and really draw out what you really want for your garden in the future. There's a lot going on in this, and it's because I'm drawing garden areas that haven't even nearly been developed yet. For instance, Mossy Hill has some shrubs, and it has a tree or two in real life, but it doesn't really have much in the way of beds yet. It's just getting started. It is a super new space that is kind of experimental. I feel a little bit more adventurous back there because it's only viewable by one neighbor and myself. And so I feel like I have a little bit more freedom back there to experiment, and plus it's already coated in moss in the very center. So that is a beautiful starting point. And we also have a no-mow area back there already. So it's got a start going on, but it's not really a developed garden at this point. So this was my chance to draw what it could look like if it was actually a developed garden space. And this is just a drawing of my current gate, but then some changes and additions to add to the gate. Maybe lanterns to the left and right of the gate, maybe a very cute extra special post topper on the right there, and a different kind of top above the gate, more curved instead of the current square rendition. Definitely more intricate and more expensive to do, so this could be way, way, way in the future, and it's just kind of a dream of mine to kind of update this area and add some nice little tweaks and details. This is a nice little garden design of the front yard. Again, you can see the archway kind of in the right, kind of in the middle there, above the patio. And this is kind of a mix between detailed and simple, because there's vast areas of this that have no writing in them and no detail, but then there's other areas that have a lot of detail packed in a tiny little space. And let me explain what my thought process was for this. My thought process was, here's what I currently have, and also here's kind of what I want it to look like in the future. So it's kind of a combination between what I already have and what I want to add. So I already have a lot of this, except a lot of those evergreen pointy little Christmas trees in the middle near the little seating area there. I don't have those yet, but I thought it would be nice to have some evergreen little Christmas tree looking privacy screening plants in the middle of the garden, not just at the edge of the garden. Because I noticed that's something that would probably give it more of a garden room effect. I want a lot of mystery and garden room effects and a lot of paths that wind around, and you don't really know what's behind that tree over there, and you don't really know what's around the corner of that shrub. I want a lot of mystery, privacy, and intrigue in the garden. That is one of my biggest garden goals other than bringing in the wildlife. And the next few clips here, you're going to see a little blue chair, and you're going to see kind of, this is an idea of a seating area. Take pictures from multiple angles when you're trying to decide on a seating area, because it's going to look totally different from one direction to another. This is another perspective in the garden facing the chair. But the other two clips were from the window. And now let's talk about the passion vine. Passion vine is a host plant for fritillary butterflies, and it is beloved by hummingbirds. It is a wild plant. So you'll definitely want to keep that in mind if you decide to plant it. It is going to pop up all over your garden. So if you are disturbed by a plant that pops up feet away from the parent plant, don't plant this. But honestly, I think we need to stop being so perfectionistic about our garden, because I personally think we should all plant this. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but in my opinion, we're too perfectionist and worried about these things getting out of control. And in my opinion, this vine is not really worrisome, because even though it does pop up all over the place, and it can be kind of a pain, because then you might want to pull it out in some places. The thing is it's not super rigid and it doesn't have that grapevine quality where it's got this trunk to it. It's actually the type of perennial that dies back to the ground every year and comes back fresh every year. So even though it does get more lush each year and does spread more each year, so far, in my experience, it doesn't get like this big trunk on it. It doesn't get like this big stem that is hard to deal with and that is scary. It doesn't have thorns either. So it's kind of one of those vines where, yeah, it's aggressive, but it's native, well, to my area. I'm in East Tennessee. You need to look up where it's native to, because it might not be native where you live, depending on where you actually are. But if it's native to your area, I encourage you to plant it. And again, I'm only telling you about it popping up everywhere because I want you to be aware, because I don't want someone to plant this and then get frustrated and be like, oh my gosh, this person told me to plant this and I had no idea it was going to pop up all over the place. It will pop up all over the place. But the great thing about that is if you have enough of it, you're going to get to witness the entire life cycle of the fritillary butterfly. And I forget which kind of fritillary it is. I always forget the exact name, but it is a beautiful fritillary that has metallic spots on it and bright orange hues on it. So you're definitely going to want that in your garden. I guess the only time I'd tell you not to plant it is if your garden is teeny tiny, like I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine a garden that can't contain it. Basically, if your garden is really small, but it's surrounded by other land, and it can't be contained within, like, concrete, or, like, if you have a balcony garden, and you're surrounded by concrete and buildings, like, you can grow this in a pot. You just have to keep it happy. It needs plenty of sun and water. But, I mean, it's not really going to be able to take over if you have a lot of concrete that's not cracked and stuff. Now, if you have a lot of cracks and holes in your concrete, it's going to pop up between that. Trust me, I know, because it's popped up between the cracks in my concrete. But anyway, it is prolific, it is aggressive, it is a spreader. But here's the deal. It's a host plant to the fritillaries. Look at this hummingbird. The hummingbirds love it. Also, the bees, the carpenter bees, they love it. It looks like they need it. I mean, they just go wild for it. I think they evolved together, and so it's just a whole beautiful relationship. But also, it produces edible fruit. I will repeat, it produces edible fruit for humans. So, yeah, it is a great plant to have. It's beautiful. It can create great privacy in the summer. I'd say the privacy aspect is mostly like mid to late summer. because it does take it a while to pop up in the spring and early summer. It takes it a while to get going, but once it's going, it's really, really going, and it's beautiful to look at. It fills my whole entire archway up and then some. So I highly recommend it. I also like to leave the fruits for the wildlife because when we get into these cold months that we're getting into right now and we're about to enter wintertime, I noticed the cardinals and the squirrels are actually eating the seeds out of the passion fruit now. You know, as that fruit's getting dried out and the seeds are getting dried out, the wildlife, they're eating the seeds. So it's a great plant for multiple wildlife species. I'm sure there's probably some uses for raccoons and possums too, maybe. I don't know for sure, don't quote me on that, but I could see them eating the fruit. I just haven't witnessed it yet. But highly recommend this plant. Just remember, it will pop up all over the place. It will pop up in your lawn too. So if you're a lawn person, you're not going to want to plant it. If you're a formal garden person that likes everything like clipped really short and like neat and like super stiff, no offense, but like super stiff and rigid, don't plant this. You're just going to be sad. But my thing with that is like maybe just change your perspective and your garden practices in general if that's how you are. Again, no offense, but that's just my opinion. And we are on the channel called A Wild Approach, so I'm assuming if you're here, you're probably for a more wild garden anyway. And here is the archway itself full of passion vine. Isn't that beautiful? I love that so much. Here's another view of the passion vine from a distance. You can see that I've got like a path started here, and I really, really love how this looks. We've got this windy, curvy path, and you can take a right turn to go under the passion vine archway, and that leads to my patio, which is right off of my art studio. I just love this image. I think it's gorgeous. It's definitely got that mystery to it. It's like, oh, what's around the corner to the right? Oh, what's around the corner to the left? Oh, what if I go this way or that way? Or what if I go under the archway? So many options. Now, my garden is far from perfect. I have a lot of invasive grasses that pop up all over the place. I have that crepe myrtle that I didn't know wasn't native back in the day. Like, when I first started gardening, I didn't even know really about native plants and the importance of them that much. So when I planted that crepe myrtle, I didn't know any better, okay? But in the meantime, I plan to just plant like native plants around it. But right now I do have some annoying grasses that don't really belong there. But I'm still trying to create that soft landing for wildlife, and I'm trying to create like beds around my trees, even if they're not a native tree. So even though it's not perfect, I still think it's beautiful. I still love it, and I have a lot of plans for it and making it better along the way every year. Here's the archway with the passion vine not yet growing on it. As you can see, the bones of this archway are more natural. They're branches from box elder I don't know about box elder tree, I forget. Maybe box elder tree, but also crepe myrtle tree, grapevine, just things we've trimmed and clipped. I didn't trim the crepe myrtle, that was actually a neighbor. They put a bunch of the branches at the road, and we walked over and took some because they were just too pretty and architectural not to use in the garden. And this is actually cemented into the ground, but it's cemented in the ground with like small little posts just so that it looks more natural, so you can't really see the posts as well. So it's not going to last forever because it's not as sturdy as, say, my gate over there on the right. But we knew that going into it. We knew that eventually we would have to probably replace it. And so far, it's still standing. And I think we put this in 2018 or 2019. So it's been standing for several years, which is awesome. And the crepe myrtle branches are actually new. We added those like in 2021 or something. So we add to it when we can. Here's the same archway in wintertime with the snow really weighing it down. And usually I do have to repair it every once in a while and add some wire to reinforce the top of it and make the top of it kind of an arch again, because it does in the winter, if we get enough snow, it does tend to kind of get weighed down. But here's different images of the archway in different seasons and different years. So here's a view of the garden as it's been freshly mowed. And this is before I added the annual bed near the gate. So you can see more of the driveway than you can now. This is an older image. But you've got the crepe myrtle in the middle. You've got the black cherry tree on the right. You've got some arborvitaes in the distance to the right. And Joe Pye weed. I've got a redbud tree there between the crepe myrtle and the arborvitaes. To the left, I have my archway with my passion vine. I've got blanket flower. I've got Gara, Coreopsis. And down the line, I have lantana. I have ironweed. And then toward the gate, I have verbena bonariensis, things like that. So I have a lot of non-natives still, because when I first started gardening again, I gardened for butterflies. I didn't garden just native plants. I did butterfly gardening in general, so it was a combo of native and non-native. And in this image, you can see to the left, you can see my patio a little bit. You can see the archway in front of it. You can see my art studio doors. Those glass doors go to my art studio. So from my art studio, I have the view of the archway. And so I get to see the birds hanging out in the vine, hanging out on the archway any day I want. It's great. And so in this particular image, it's a little bit earlier in the season, but it's not super early. So it's not like spring in this image. It's probably like earlier midsummer. And I know that because of how much passion vine there is and how tall the ironweed is. The ironweed is kind of in the middle there, near that double window, to the left of the porch. It's actually in the bed, where the archway is. It's actually in that same bed, but it kind of looks like it's in the raised bed, but it's not. In front of that are some I think they're non-native irises. But if you don't know, there's actually a lot of native irises you could plant instead. So we've got a bed with that soft landing, and what soft landing means is basically, if you have the desire to plant for butterflies in their caterpillar stage, you will want them to have a, quote, soft landing, which means that below your shrubs, below your vines, below your trees, you want to have a garden bed of soft plants, which is really just, soft perennials for them to land in, grasses for them to land in. Ground cover for them to land in. You want like a fluffy layer that's shorter than the other layers, but still tall enough for them to land safely. It's just great. It's great to have for the winter too, so that during the winter time, wildlife still has shelter. So that's another reason why you don't want to cut things back in the fall and winter. You want to leave them up throughout spring. And here you will see another view, more toward the street, of the arborvitaes and the Joe Pye weed and the redbud and the beautyberry shrub and coneflower, purple coneflower, frostweed, bee balm, etc., etc. And this is I call this bed Habitat Hedge, because I want it densely planted. I want it planted with things that the wildlife love and that they can shelter in, or they can shelter underneath of. And I think this is from 2021, not 2022. And I can tell because the fence posts are still wood instead of white, and we didn't have as many arborvitaes as we do now. Now we have a whole line of arborvitaes up against that fence. So this is actually, I think, about a year and a few months old now, this image. Same thing with this image. This is the crepe myrtle in 2021. It didn't really bloom that well in 2021. And the ironweed is kind of to the right, near the corner of the house there. It's not actually at the corner of the house, but it looks like it in this image. Archway is to the left of that ironweed, and then somewhere behind that crepe myrtle is the wild black cherry. And then to the right bottom corner of this graphic is either bee balm or mountain mint, because I actually have bee balm and mountain mint planted there. And here is the passion vine on the left, a trellis next to it, and you can see the passion fruits hanging from the passion vine. And you can see the blanket flower below as the soft landing, some lantana in the middle ground, and then the gate, the blue gate, in the background. And then to the right of all that, you can see this huge section of white fence, which is the part of the fence that we can actually open and let the car in if we need an extra parking space or if we need to get some mulch in here and just make it easier. Here's a graphic from, I think, 2020, but I could be wrong. It's either 2019 or 2020. And this is Habitat Hedge before we really had much in it. This is back before the arborvitaes. This is when my little eastern red cedar was super tiny and struggling there in the bottom in the little circle of stones. That's an eastern red cedar that I transplanted from my backyard to my front yard, and it did not enjoy that first year. But ever since then, it's been growing pretty well. I'll have to keep it in check, though, because those trees can get huge, but they're slow growing. So in the meantime, I might be able to keep it clipped, but eventually I might have to get rid of it because it is kind of not the best spot for it. It can work, it just might not work with my design. But I just couldn't resist saving this little eastern red cedar and putting it up here to give me a little bit of privacy in the meantime before other things grow in. And here is the Habitat Hedge in, I want to say, what month was this? I don't know what month this is, but this is probably early summer, maybe, 2022. This is probably not long after we planted the rest of the arborvitaes. And so you can see it looks a lot better. It looks a lot more designed because we have an unbroken train or chain of arborvitaes up against the fence now. And I know they're kind of hard to see in some ways because of our shrubs and our perennials in front of them. But as they grow, as they get taller, it'll look more cohesive. And then to the left, there's a redbud that's been doing so well. This redbud has been doing the best out of all of our redbuds so far. And then the far right, you can see there's white flowers. That is actually black elderberry, the native elderberry to my area. I have some phlox to the left of that. I have some lance leaf. Oh, what is it called? It's not lance leaf coreopsis. Oh gosh, I can't remember. There's like this lance leaf plant that has red, like a red tone to the leaves a certain time of year, and the flowers are tiny and yellow, and it's really nice as a ground cover. Love it. And then to the left of that is a little bushy looking thing. That's actually not a bush at all. That is frostweed starting to grow. And to the left of that is the variegated phlox. To the left of that is a beautyberry shrub. And then if you keep going left, you'll still be purple coneflower that's not really bloomed yet. Stuff like that. So that's how I can tell it's like it's not early spring, but it's like I think early summer. Because it's not early enough to where there's nothing going on, but but it's too early for there to be a lot of the blooms. So, but yeah, you got the elderberry blooms though, and that's one of my favorite shrubs. All right, and here's just a little sweep of the garden. You can see the arborvitaes there up against the fence. On the other side of the fence are some invasive privets that we cut way back, but it didn't really do much because they just flushed right back out. So I plan to have those removed and replaced by a wonderful native plant gardener landscaper very soon. And there's the gate, open, with bee balm in front of it. But guys, I want you to see this image because this image is really important to see. This is probably early spring, and it just looks, it's before everything's really flushed in, and it just looks empty, right? It just looks like there's nothing happening, and it's because it's early in the season and not a lot of stuff's leafed out yet, and the things that have leafed out, they don't have their blooms yet, possibly, depending on the plant, of course. But you can see I have a little butterfly puddle in the middle of that habitat hedge on the right there. Kind of hard to see, maybe. But there's this little round dish. That's a butterfly puddle. Has little pebbles in it, pebbles in it, and water. Try to have multiple water sources in your garden if you can. And as you can see, there are seeds everywhere. Look at that. I think it's the helicopter seeds from some maple trees. I don't really know if it's from silver maple or box elder or what, because I haven't quite learned yet when each of these drop their seeds, but this was a huge crop in this particular image this particular year. And I'll tell you who loves those seeds: chipmunks. I'm a huge fan of chipmunks. They're one of my favorite little critters to watch in the garden. And they will store these little maple seeds, these helicopter leaves. They will store them, not leaves, these helicopter seeds. They'll store them somewhere and hide them. They'll have a little stash of them. Like, I found a whole stash of them, like, next to my gutter one time in my raised bed, like, behind a plant, and realized that it was, like, I think the chipmunk had been hiding in the gutter and, like, coming out, going in the gutter, and coming out, like, kind of, you know, whenever we would walk by, it would, like, go in the gutter, because I would hear, like, this noise in the gutter. I'm like, what is that? It was a little chipmunk eating the seeds of those, and then making a pile of the spent helicopters, like, that they had already eaten the seeds out of. Just made, like, a whole pile of it, just like, oh, this is my trash, you know, just my little trash pile. It was so cute. I loved it. I loved it. Here we go. Garden journal. Keep a garden journal. I can't stress this enough. That's what this image is for. It's just to inspire you to keep a garden journal. And it can be as beautiful as you want it to be, or as plain as you want it to be. Also, certify your habitat if you can. I have mine certified through the Wildlife Habitat Federation, the National Wildlife Federation, sorry. The National Wildlife Federation in NWF. And in my area, I'm in Tennessee, so it's also got the TWF logo on there. But it's food, water cover, and places to raise young. That's what you need. Food, water cover, and places to raise young. And you do purchase the sign online. I didn't want to finish this video without talking about great books I like. The Living Landscape by Rick Dark and Doug Tallamy, Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy, and then Butterflies of Tennessee, A Field and Garden Guide by Rita Venable. These are probably my top 3 favorite books, but I have other books I love, and I have other books that I want to read that I haven't read yet. So if you would like a new video on native plant gardening books and wildlife gardening books, let me know, because I can probably create a new video in the future for you of that. And I wanted to show you some pictures of the garden in fall, because one of my other tips for having a wildlife garden is to leave your seed heads up and to leave as many stems up as you can. Yeah, you should collect some seeds if you want to plant those plants again, or if you want to share them with a friend, but leave as many seed heads up and for the wildlife as you possibly can, and your spent fruit. And that's what I've done here. I've got a lot of mistflower seeds still up, ironweed seeds still up, frostweed seeds, you name it, I got it. Coneflower too. And I think that it's actually pretty in the winter, because when the snow lands on all this stuff, oh, the textures, oh, the diversity, it's gorgeous. But that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylu.com. Thanks for watching!